Sharpening is another one of those things that you do as your standard operating procedure before something goes to print. Images can look duller, and because we have a black component with ink on paper, we can add a lot more contrast. And to prevent images looking not as sharp when the ink absorbs into the paper, sharpening will really help deliver that pop and contrast and detail you want for a printing press. So several years ago, Adobe added Smart Sharpen. Well, with Photoshop CC, they've improved it more. It's located under Filter, Sharpen, and Smart Sharpen. And I'm going to drag the eyes into view here. I can click and drag on the preview window and it shows me 100%. And I could scoot the whole window over a bit to look at her face in the background as I'm making these changes. Now, amount is overall percentage of sharpening you'd like to add. Do you want it 50% sharper than when you started, 100% sharper, 200? And the range in the past was usually from 50 to 200. If we went overboard to something like 500, it could do some pretty damaging things. But here at 500, I could turn preview off and on, and I am getting noise. In fact, you could see a before and after by clicking and holding and letting go, but it's not as extreme as I would have expected. Radius is the thickness of the sharpening line. So here, between an area where I have light and darker, how thick do you want to emphasize that change? So if I slide radius up, we used to do 1.2, 1.4, 1.6, 1.8, because anything over 2, especially on a person, could look very artificial. So if I look at these settings, here's before and after. It did clearly get noisier. I'll uncheck preview, before and after, and some noise is definitely introduced. But check and see how much better it is than the previous version. If I hit this little gear icon on the right, I can check Use Legacy, which behaves like the last version of Photoshop and older versions. That is extreme. So this would have been what I got in the last version. With Photoshop CC, here I get a much smoother result. And I have the ability to reduce the noise. So I can slide Reduce Noise up, protecting the more solid tones in the image, but still sharpening where it needs to be. So before, after. I do that until I really don't see any noise introduced here, but I'm getting much better detail overall throughout the face where I want it. So I will click OK. I'll zoom in a few steps with Command plus to 100% and hit Command Z or Control Z before, after. So Command Z or Control Z will do that before and after. And with ink on paper, you need a little bit more sharpness than just on your standard screen. So it may look a little sharper than you want, but it'll produce a better high-end image. So let's try this with one other shot. Again, you may not realize this is out of focus until you go to do the sharpening. So I'll place this little bird over here, Filter, Sharpen, Smart Sharpen. I'll click the bird's head to bring the head and the eye into view, and it kept the previous settings. So before, after. Now in here, if I hold and let go, I am getting quite a bit of noise, or actually some noise. If I set this to 0, there's a lot more noise introduced in the solid areas. I'll slide this up until the solids still look smooth, but I'm getting sharpness everywhere else where I need it. And if I choose Use Legacy, that's what we would have gotten. All of this noise, haloing or white lining, where you get white lines around the edges of objects that shouldn't be there. Turn Use Legacy off, and it's much more subtle. And in fact, in the before and after, I could see a little bit of haloing was captured in the original shot. So sometimes that does help add depth or detail, but too much of it is definitely not preferred. And I could back down my settings if I think I don't need as much. Objects, inanimate objects, not birds or people, can actually handle a lot more radius than people's faces or things that shouldn't have really sharp, crisp edges, hair and fur. So I'm happy with this. So let's take a look at our overall before and after. I'll just use history, before, after, Smart Sharpen. Much more detail, much better look on the girl, before and after. Before and after. And this one is good to see fit in window, to see the details in her necklace and her hair that have been revealed. So I hope you've enjoyed this tour of sharpening. Before you output high-end images, you typically will need to add a little bit more sharpening so that contrast and detail is carried from your screen to ink on paper.